Today we're zooming in on the minutiae at the beginning of the parable of the sower in Mark chapter 4. Before we do that, let's get a little context. Here's Mark chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. This is from the ESV. Again, he began to teach beside the sea, and a very large crowd gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat in it on the sea. And the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. And he was teaching them many things in parables. And in his teaching, he said to them, and that's going to bring us to verse 3. But before we do that, and that's our focus today is verse 3. Before we do that, I just want to talk about the physical dynamic that Mark lays out for us. Jesus in a boat pushed out a little bit from the shore with a large crowd on the shore. So obviously, the land is always higher than the water, right? If not, the water would run out. And we have the dynamic here of a naturally occurring amphitheater. If the speaker is on the water, pushed out a little from the shore, and the crowd is on the shore, we get this naturally occurring amplification, carrying of one's voice, and it's a perfect setup for Jesus to address this large crowd there on the shore. I've always loved that dynamic, so I just had to go on that tangent for a moment. But let's get into our subject of the day, which is verse 3. Listen, behold, a sower went out to sow. So let's take a look at it in Koine. Akuate, idu, exelthen, hosperon sperai. So akuate, listen. This is a present active imperative second person plural. He's telling his audience, this is Jesus speaking in the in the narrative. He's telling his audience, listen, hear, acoustics is what we get from this word, right? Pay attention, listen. It's imperative. It's not, even though the form is the same as present active indicative second person plural, he's not just saying, you guys hear. He's saying, listen. This is a command. Pay attention to what's about to come. His next word, idu, behold, look. So I love that combination. Listen and look. So apparently, he's about to tell them something that is very, very important. First, he calls them to attention to hear what it is he's going to say. Then he says to them, behold, look, a sower went out to sow. He's calling them to carefully consider the contents of this parable. Idu is what's called the demonstrative particle. It's a fascinating thing because it comes from an imperative of adon, look or see. So it's from the aorist middle imperative of adon. Look, behold, see this thing. And the only way to tell the difference is in the accenting. One has the circumflex accent, the other one has the acute. Is it the acute or the grave? But one has the particle has the acute or grave, and the aorist middle has the circumflex. But the key here is it was such a common use that it went from being this aorist imperative to being the demonstrative particle. Look at this thing. Take a careful examination of what it is you're about to see. Consider this. So it's not literal here. How do we know it's not literal? Couldn't Jesus have seen some guy sowing off on the shore and called people's attention to it? It's possible, but when you read the rest of the parable, the complexity of the parable and the completeness of the outcomes, there's multiple outcomes for where the seed wound up falling when this broadcast sower was hurling seeds, that it's unlikely that they witnessed all those things during the course, this very brief telling of this parable. So it's much more likely that the complexity of the story is what he's calling their attention to. Listen, pay attention, consider carefully, look at this thing I'm describing. A sower went out to sow. Idu can introduce changes, a twist, or a new development. It can focus on a quote, or it can even focus on numbers. And kai idu is frequently used to introduce the addition of something new into a list of things or an ongoing tale. But here, it introduces the entirety of the parable, the whole story. Listen, pay attention, behold, look, consider. A sower went out to sow. Let's carry on. Hosperon, this is an articular participle. This is the participle describing what a person is known for, right? So who is the sower? The one who sows. Hosperon, the one who sows. And what do we know about him? We know exalthein, he went out. This is aorist active indicative, third person singular from ex erkomai, I go out. Thus, the one who sows, the sower, went out. And then we get sperai, the present active infinitive. This is what's known as a simple infinitive or a naked infinitive that shows purpose. What is the purpose of his going out? It's to sow. And that makes perfect sense, because what do we know about the person who went out? We know that he is the one who sows. The one who sows went out to sow for the purpose of sowing. Then we get this very complex parable that tells us all about the outcomes of the seeds that the one who sows after going out to sow. People who've commented on Mark's gospel have said that the parable of the sower in Mark's gospel is sort of the archetypical model for understanding Mark. It's kind of the paradigm that sets the flow for the rest of the gospel. Everyone else that he encounters, that Jesus encounters throughout the course of Mark's gospel, sort of falls under the heading of one of the places where the seed fell. You know, some falls on hard ground and can't take root. Others gets gobbled up by birds before it has a chance. You know, there's some that falls into shallow soil. It springs up quickly but has no root, so it doesn't last, etc., etc. We're going to see in the rest of Mark's gospel people who look like the different soils. Now, Matthew and Luke both also include the parable of the sower, and all three of them include an explanation from Jesus about the parable of the sower. But there's a little bit of a difference. In Matthew and Luke, the parable shows up later in the story, whereas in Mark, Jesus calls his early apostles. We have some interaction with John the Baptist. And then very early on, chapter 4, we get this sort of paradigm setting telling of this parable. But in Matthew, it doesn't come until chapter 13. And in Luke, it doesn't come until chapter 8. And there's another pretty significant difference. Matthew's account has the idu, behold, a sower went out to sow his seed, right? But he doesn't have the akuete. So he doesn't say, listen, behold, a sower went out to sow. And Luke not only doesn't have the akuete, the listen, he doesn't even have the idu. He just starts with a sower went out to sow. Let me rephrase that. In Luke's gospel, Jesus just starts with a sower went out to sow. Whereas Matthew gives us, behold, a sower went out to sow. But no one has that double imperative, that incredibly strong statement, listen, behold, the sower went out to sow. So what? Why does this matter? Mark has Jesus really drive the emphasis. Mark wants his audience to pay careful attention to this archetypical parable that's going to inform their understanding for the rest of his gospel. It's significant. Listen, pay attention, behold, look, consider this thing that I'm about to tell you. Pick this story apart and really understand it, because it's going to set the tone for the rest of the gospel. So listen, pay attention. Go read Mark chapter 4, verses 4 through 8, and add 9 on there, let he who has ears to hear. And then go and read the explanation in verses 13 through 20. It'll set your palate, it'll get you ready for all of Mark's gospel that follows on after that. Great stuff, interesting emphasis. Akuete, listen, pay close attention. Idu, behold, look, consider this thing that I'm about to tell you. And then we get the great parable of the sower. Who's the sower? The one who sows. What do we know about him? He went out. To do what? For what purpose? To sow. And then the rest comes along. Thanks for watching today. If it was good for you, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And until next time, Karis Kairene, who mean grace and peace to you.